Hello guys, welcome to my channel. So in this video I am going to explain about thread conditional on property annotations. What are the things we are going to see in this video is what are the prerequisite for the learning this, and why conditional on property annotation is used, what is the conditional on property annotation, what are the real time use cases, and how to implement this annotation, and the advantages and disadvantages of this annotation. And as a part of prerequisite, you need to be very good at dependency injection and spring bean life cycle. So those are the prerequisite in order to understand this thread conditional on property annotation. So why we need this conditional on property? So actually what happens is when your application is coming up, all the beats are getting initialized during the application startup, right? So we don't want to initialize all the beans during application startup, because if all the unnecessary beans also getting initialized, the application context will be cluttered, and we want to create the beans on condition. So that is why we are using conditional on property annotation. And what is conditional property? So here the bean will be created conditionally. Okay, and let's look at what are the use cases, or how where we are using this annotation. So the use cases include, uh, first I'll explain you the code and then I'll explain you the use case. Okay, so in the code what I have written is I have a DB connection class. So this is the DB connection. So what it is doing is, I am making it as a component, and it is having this dependency MySQL connection and NoSQL connection. Okay, and I have a post construct method as well, where I am printing all these DB connection in it and all the MySQL and NoSQL connections. So let's go to MySQL connections. So here I am just marking it as a component, and I am having the constructor of it. And in the NoSQL also I am having the same thing. Okay. So what is the use case means? For example, I want to create only one bean. Okay, either MySQL connection or NoSQL connection. Then I need to use this at the conditional property annotation. Okay, I'll explain it how we will use. And another use case is, we have two components which are sharing the same DB. For example, there are two applications which are depending on the same code base. Okay, and one component needs a MySQL connection from the code base, and another needs the NoSQL connection. In that case, we are going to use this conditional on property. Now there is no conditional on property. I am going to run this application. Let's see. See, as soon as you run this application, so it will go to this DB connection in it. So while initializing this DB connection, it sees this dependency, that is MySQL connection and NoSQL connection. It will go to this MySQL connection class, and it will execute the constructor, and it will initialize this object. And after that it will check whether any other dependencies are there. So there is no other dependency, so it will mark this as completed. MySQL is completed, and also it will do the same for NoSQL connection. After that, it will create a bean for this DB connection, and once after bean is created, it will execute this post construct method. So in the post construct method, you can see the all the three statements are printed, and this is the MySQL connection object and NoSQL connection object. Okay. Now let's try to use the thread conditional on property annotation. So what is the thread conditional and property annotation means? So how we will use means, you just add thread conditional on property annotation, and it has so many parameters. Okay. So the first parameter is prefix. So prefix is nothing but it's a kind of a name, okay, property name. So I can give the prefix as my SQL connection, and another property is that is value, that is I am giving it as enabled, and having value is true. Okay. And match if missing is false. Okay. I'll explain what is match if missing is. Okay. And in the same way I am doing the same for this NoSQL connection as well. So same, the prefix I am giving it as NoSQL connection, value is enabled, having true, having value is true, and the match if missing is false. So for example, how do we configure this means, I want to create this NoSQL connection only if the NoSQL connection is enabled. Okay, how do we do that? Is this prefix is there, right? This prefix plus this value, it becomes the key. Okay, how means you can say the prefix is NoSQL connection and the value is enabled. That is, yeah, NoSQL connection dot enabled. If it is having the value true, then you create this bin. So that is what we are mentioning. So where we are configuring this value is in the application or properties file. You can see if the NoSQL connection dot enabled is true, okay, NoSQL connection dot enabled is true, then you create this bin. Then if not, don't create that bin, okay. So like that we are enable. Now the value is true, okay. So I will keep the MySQL as false and NoSQL as true. Now let's try to run this application. Now only NoSQL object should be created and MySQL object should not be created because the property is false. Okay. So we will see this here. Yeah. You observe this field MySQL connection is could not be found. So we are getting this error, right? So what it is trying to do means in the DB connection. Okay, in the DB connection, it is trying to inject this NoSQL connection. NoSQL connection bean is there, it is injecting. But MySQL connection bean is not there because we made the property as false. You can see I made this property as false because of which there is no bean. So in that case, what we need to do is there is an annotation called as sorry, there is one parameter called as required is equal to false. Okay, so why we need to make required is equal to false means to make sure that our application won't fail because we got the error right, we won't get the error when you even when you don't create a bean, then you should not get any error. That's why you should make it as false. Okay. Now I'll try to run this application. Let's see how it works. Yeah. Now you can see I have enabled only this NoSQL in the properties, right? So NoSQL is true. You can see what it is printing is it is printing only NoSQL with the NoSQL object, okay, and MySQL is null, okay. So this is how this arthread conditional on property is working. That means only we are creating the object on conditional basis. Okay, that Spring Bean on a conditional basis. And here this MySQL connection is there, right? We can make it as true, and instead of true, we can give any value. Like for example, create I can give MySQL is equal to create, and in the application dot properties instead of false I can give create. Okay, if create if the value if MySQL connection dot enabled is having the value create, then it will create the bin. Apart from create, if you do abcd also it won't create the bin. That is one thing you need to remember. And after that there is something called as uh, match if missing, okay, false. So what is this means? For example, I have these two configurations in the application or property file. Suppose if those configurations are not there, okay, imagine if those configurations are not there. Now let's run this application and see what will be the output. I forgot to mention this as also required is equal to false. Let's try to make required is equal to false and let's rerun once again. You can see uh, all these are coming as null. The MySQL connection is also null. NoSQL connection is also null. Okay. So because there is no property and also we are saying the match if missing is false. Okay. But if you make this property as true, then Spring will create a bean of MySQL connection. I'll prove how it is. So I am, you can see I made the my match if missing. If the property is missing, then create a bin like that we are saying. Okay. So let's try to run this application. Now, what happens is only this MySQL bean should be created and NoSQL bean should not be created. Let's see how it works. So you can see only the MySQL bean got created and NoSQL it is having null. Okay. So that is how this at the rate conditional and property annotation works. Like we are creating a bean on a conditional basis. Okay. Now let's try to understand what are the advantages and use cases. Just a second. So now let's try to look at what are the advantages and disadvantages of this annotation. So what are the advantages is feature toggling. So for if you want to toggle a feature, then we can use this annotation and avoid cluttering the application context with unnecessary bins. Because when application is getting started, the application context will be this IOC container will be cluttered with unnecessary beans. So since we are creating the beans on conditional basis, so this will be avoided and it saves memory because we are not creating unnecessary beans, which results in saving the memory. And since these unnecessary beans are not getting created, the application startup time will also reduces so that the performance will be increased. So these are the advantages of using this annotation. And what are the disadvantages of using this annotation is misconfiguration can happen. Since we are configuring everything here, for example, instead of in this application or properties, instead of these annotations, you configure something ABCD or something XYZ. Okay, so this misconfiguration can happen, which result in the application startup failure. Okay, that is one. And code complexity increases when overused. Like if you're using so many for all the classes at the rate conditional and property annotation, like imagine there are 1,000 classes and you use this annotation for all the 1,000 classes, then it's very difficult to manage because you need to write 1,000 properties, make it as true, false, enabled, so many things. So which increases the complexity of programming, and all these configurations are very difficult to manage. So you need to use only for specific classes which are required to create a bean on a conditional basis. If you are overusing it, then it will be very difficult to manage everything, this configuration and also the bean creation. So I think these are the advantages and disadvantages of using these annotations. So if you are using on a limited classes, then it is very very much useful, this annotation. So if you have any questions, please type it in the comment section, and thank you so much for watching.